I've got about 60 slides. It's quite a lot, but I thought it would be good to show some pictures. Um, and I'm just going to talk through a bit about my career as a curator so far. Some things that I've done. So just a bit about me really, and some examples of exhibitions that I've worked on and places I've worked and things like that. A little bit about what I'm doing now, and then also just a few thoughts really at the end of this presentation about what's been happening in the last few months. So how I've been feeling about it, things I've been thinking about, some good things that I've seen, and yeah, I thought it might be nice to kind of close with that, and then maybe that will stimulate some discussion at the end, because I'd be really interested to hear what all your thoughts are and what you've been up to and what good things you've seen too, and bad things maybe. So yeah, I'll just start off giving you a little bit of background. So I am these days a freelancer. I'll come on to that a bit. So I'm a curator mainly, but also writer and an art and culture consultant, and a Reiki healer, which I will also talk a little bit about in a bit. Come on. So yeah, this is a gallery space that was set up on the ground floor of the international headquarters of Collar, and it was set up really to build a community of artists to showcase the best of what was happening in contemporary art in London and beyond in their headquarters. So the art materials company, but they were really keen to engage much more widely with the art community globally. Because they still do actually own a number of art materials brands, including Winsor & Newton and Liquitex. Those are the two biggest ones. And both of those brands have really sort of struggled to hold their own in the amongst their competitors, and so they recognise the need to support artists and to get much more involved in the world of artistic practice. So that was the intention behind setting up Britain Gallery in the first place. They didn't really have much idea what they wanted to do with the space before I came along, so it was an amazing opportunity for me to just build it the way that I thought would be best. So we did all sorts of things there during the 6 years that it existed. We had a lovely time. It's a beautiful space, as you can see, quite industrial looking. On the far right, that picture, there's what they call a tea room. So there was a sort of social space there as well, which was a bit odd because it operated as the staff room for the rest of the building, as well as a kind of social space for the art space. So a bit of a weird mixing of things. It was a sort of very corporate looking building as well. So it definitely came with its challenges, but the space itself was really nice. And then we'd reconfigure it a bit. So it was sort of in this L shape that you can see there. And for a while, we knocked out the back wall to kind of change the configuration and rebuilt different walls and stuff like that. And you'll see a little bit as we go through. So we started with this example of kind of collaborations that we did. So we collaborated with various different art schools, including École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. Collaborated with various different departments and different years to kind of put this collaborative exhibition together. So I went forth to Paris to meet the students over a period of about 8 or 9 months, and helping them to kind of put together a proposal for an exhibition, which they did. And so it was a kind of an opportunity for them to put on a real life exhibition in a real life gallery and to have the experience of working collaboratively, which I called a bizarre. They don't really do that very much. It's not particularly cross art form, or even cross the department, or even cross particular studio room. They don't really, they're sort of very siloed. So the school had recognised that and wanted to do something about it. So that was one of the projects that we did. We also had a few solo shows, some that came as the result of the Griffin Art Prize, which was an annual art prize we ran for several years, which was aiming to kind of seek out the best of graduating talent from UK art institutions. So it was open to anyone who graduated from any kind of education establishment in the last 7 years. This was a resulting solo show from a winner from 2014, I think, should have Marnie Clues. So the Griffin Art Prize had various different iterations, and we sort of tweaked every year to meet the needs of the artists. And it started off by being the prize that we ended up awarding to one winner every year was a 6-month residency in the building. So there were 2 studios up on the 4th floor of the same building. And that was the prize for the first few years, was a 6-month residency with all the materials that you'd want, resulting in a solo show at the end. So we did a few of those. Chid was one of them. So she made a whole range of kind of quite installation-based paintings, responding to the local environment of White City, which is where the Griffin Gallery was. We also did quite often took in incoming proposals from artists or curators, and this was a proposal that I said yes to. It was a really great show put together by two artists, Rebecca Byrne and Liz Elton, which some of you may well know. It was called Pool, and it was like looking at the expanded field of the painting, and it really kind of did something quite interesting to the space. The way they installed the work was quite interactive in many ways and immersive, and kind of changed the way that you would walk into the space in particular, with this great big sort of tunnel that you walked through. And then there were sort of benches and things hanging from the ceiling. So this was done quite early days of Griffin Gallery. So every time we did something a bit different, it changed the context and the feel of the space. It demonstrated what could be done, not only to us, the team running the gallery, but also to the other occupants of the building, which are all the people who work behind the scenes at Collart, Winsor & Newton and Ipswich. So that's all sorts of finance people, IT people, the senior members of the management committee, marketing, all the scientists in the lab. So they were kind of our main daily audience, I guess. But then obviously did do private views and events and things where we brought in the visiting public, and over the years gradually built a really nice community of artists, curators, critics, so on, that came to visit us. That's the other side of the big entrance, that you had to walk through that, and it was just below head height, so to kind of crouch down and walk through to go into the space. As another solo show that we did, another Griffin Art Prize winner, as Sophia Schrager, a graduate of the Slate. Really different to the others, obviously very kind of austere, very kind of flat paintings of interiors, really meticulous and very kind of limited palette as well. She's quite an interesting artist. I've never really seen anyone sort of quite so seen out of university be really so clear about what her practice is, and then really not deviating very much at all. So during the 6 months residency, she explored some new colours and kind of shifted the type of paints that she was using a bit, but essentially her practice didn't shift that much at all, which you might consider to be a failure, but I think in her case it really wasn't, and it really kind of helped to cement what she was doing and interrogate it further and kind of dig into the science behind it as well, because the residency took place in a studio that was next to a chemistry lab, which is where the company develops all their new products for all their different brands and ranges. So it was quite a nice dialogue going on between art and science on a sort of daily basis. The artists who came on residency could ask all sorts of questions to the chemists who were working in the lab every day, which is a fairly organic process. We didn't manage it too closely so that it could just be kind of natural and authentic. And I think Sophia learnt an awful lot about colour and the meaning of colour during that time, so that's really good. Then I would do some shows which I curated myself from end to end, so my own ideas coming in, probably did about 2 of those a year. And this was a third, an example, this is a third in the series of exhibitions called Perfectionism, which I did one every year for 3 years, which was a sort of personal interest, I guess, in which came about through working for this company and learning more about the technicalities behind the making of the materials that go into making art, but also kind of just becoming very engaged with materiality during this time. And I started to become interested in the sort of process of making and seeking out and finding artists that, arguably you could apply this to pretty much every artist, but there's a sort of particular niche with it, I think. Artists who are really concerned with process and a real engagement with materiality, and dedicate an enormous amount of time to really perfecting the process. So the series was called Perfectionism, but it's not really about creating a perfect outcome, a perfect object, or a perfect thing at the end. It's really about the process and iterative, ongoing fairly obsessive process, I guess, that kind of leads the artist through their practice. Um, quite a variety of artists in this one. This one had the subtitle "The Alchemy of Making," and it was about the artist who kind of take a material and through that set of processes transform it into something completely different, elevating it or making it look or feel different. Um, so, for example, the vitrine that you can see there with the white, it's like a Chinese mountain, is entirely made from acrylic paint. Um, and it's by an artist, Piers Secunda, and that's his entire practice really, is making objects out of paint, so dried, solidified paint. So that kind of idea of transforming something that was liquid and is often, is more often used on a flat surface and turning that into a three-dimensional object was quite a good example of the type of work in the show there. That's again the same show from the other end. And another example of a piece from that is Tessa Farmer. She makes these crazy little scenes out of bits of insect and animal. You might be able to see it right at the top of the picture. There's a little skeleton with wings, which she calls fairies, and these fairies are the kind of centre of her practice. She builds worlds for fairies to inhabit. They're not fairies as you might imagine, sort of two fairies all nice, happy fairies. They're pretty evil. They destroy things, they pull things apart, and they ride wasps and bees around and attack, all sorts of things. So they look beautiful and delicate, but if you get really close in, they're pretty horrendous. I think they're amazing. And then I would quite often collaborate with other curators, or in this case, a sort of curator art advisor, Catherine Lowe, who I'd known for a few years, and we'd been talking for a few years about ideas until this show happened, which was an idea that came from her, and then we sort of built it together. So she was interested in, she'd been sort of spending a few years working with artists who were appropriating images from other artists from history, and then transforming them in some way. And so that's what this show was all about. Interesting range of artists in there. Nick Hornby and Cinta Panantras, a sculpture in the centre. Gordon Chung is with the tulips at the back. Gavin Turk is a big printed piece on the back wall. Stefan Graf, closest to us, I think. And Mario Neudecker in the little vitrine piece on the plinth in the middle. Mariola's piece. So then we had this kind of mist that rose and sank depending on the temperature in the gallery. Lovely. And again, another view of the same show with two Glenn Brown pieces on the right there. I'm just going to talk about this because this is quite an interesting moment for me as a fairly young curator, to work with pieces of work that are worth almost £1 million is quite a thing. It sort of adds whole layers of complication and admin and paperwork and stress and anxiety. So there was this whole kind of aura around these two works which we borrowed from Gagosian for the show, and they had to be brought in a particular vehicle with two very particular people who brought them. They had to be watched from where they were in the studio into the van, all the way into our space, and the space had to be cleared. There had to be no one else in the building, and our technician Tim Shaw was installing them, and he was watched the whole time while he was doing it, and it was terrifying. Which is an extraordinary thing because Glen Brown is amazing, but it is it is just paint on canvas, just like everything else. So it was a really interesting thing for me to kind of see that and see the sort of mystery that gets built around an artist whose work is very valuable, has become very valuable. And when I actually met Glenn, he was a very down-to-earth, normal, lovely chap. And you wouldn't necessarily kind of put him and that whole charade together. It's a very strange thing. Anyway, it's a little anecdote for you. So that was that show. Then this is another example of a show that I curated with another person, this time with an artist, Steve Johnson. He's a sculptor mainly, and does a bit of teaching and things as well. And this was a sort of an idea that he'd been working on for quite some time, and had actually delivered it as a lecture in a few different art schools. And we were chatting about it one day, and he said he'd always thought of doing it as an exhibition. He had no idea how to put an exhibition together. So I said, well, why don't we do it together? And so we did. And it was quite a big show. It had, I think, 35 artists in it, 1 or 2 pieces by each. And then they came from all over the place. Mostly Europe, actually. I don't think we went outside Europe, but still it was quite logistically complicated. A really lovely show, and I think really it sort of demonstrated to the owners of the building as well the kind of breadth that you could achieve with kind of conceptual centre point, which in this case was architecture as a metaphor, which really was as simple as that. We were kind of working with artists who look at architecture in their practice as a metaphorical tool. So there's a wide range of art, painting, sculpture, really some really delicate things, some quite strange things, drawings, paintings, photography, print. Up at the back, sort of essentially, you can see sort of up near the ceiling is a little bird's nest on a little shelf, which was Richard Wentworth's contribution, which is really lovely. It's a Philida Barlow piece in the front there. And then occasionally, well, pretty rarely actually, this one was particularly unusual, we would work with someone who wanted to do something pretty spectacular. So David Mack approached me to talk about an idea that he'd had for basically redoing a set of sculptures that he did back in the 70s and 80s, and sort of into the early 90s, and then he'd stopped doing them, which was building these monumental installations out of newspapers, individual newspapers stacked up. He became quite famous for them back in the sort of 80s, I think, and but stopped doing them because institutions, the way that institutions were set and run had sort of started to shift at that time. It was harder to fund them, and so I think at the time he just thought, well, maybe they've had their time. But then in 2017, he said, I really want to do another one, and I'm finding it difficult to find a suitable space where I can really, go kind of start to build back to what he was doing before. So I said, let's do it again. So we did, and it was really spectacular. So we had to bring in, well, first of all, he kind of built a false wall and then smashed it apart because he wanted to look like this installation was coming out of the wall like a big wave. So that was the first thing. And I told him he wasn't allowed to knock down any of my real walls, so he had to build a new one and then smash it. And he wanted to smash holes in the floor as well, but I said no. So we had to kind of work around all those things. Then he wanted to bring a Jeep into the building, which we thought would be fine, and then realised that actually driving a Jeep into the building, which means it has a fully functioning engine, petrol and everything, would invalidate the building insurance. So we had to figure out how to get it into the building when it was all the battery and everything was disconnected. It had no fuel inside it. So we ended up pushing it in, but that was more complicated than you might imagine because it didn't fit through the doors. It had big double doors at the entrance of the gallery, but it didn't fit through by really tiny amount on either side, so we had to take off the sort of wheel arches. You can see there were no wheel arches on there, and then we had to take the wheels off because that still wouldn't fit. So we had to take the front wheels off, put it onto a trolley, push it halfway through, put the wheels back on, come back around to take the back wheels off, put it on a trolley, push it through, and then put the wheels, and then push it into place. It was an adventure for sure. And then building the rest of it, once we'd kind of got it into position, which also kind of getting it up at that angle was tricky. It took about 2-3 weeks for David and his brother and a few assistants and helpers to build the newspaper kind of flowing around, and all the kind of railway sleepers that he brought down from Scotland, and this kind of transportation box which he'd built in the space as well. But again, this was like an opportunity to do something really different, which hadn't been done before at the Griffin Gallery, and again demonstrating the type of work that, this isn't obviously at all directly related to paint in any way. But it was really interesting because, again, it was very much about material. Like David is very concerned with material and transforming a material, like a base material like newspaper, into something that flows and is monumental and holds its shape and its form. He's always looking for the wow factor, David, and I think this definitely did it. And it certainly did it for our day-to-day audience. So the first day they came in and saw it, they were like, what the hell has happened? It was fun. It was fun to do. Interestingly, while this installation was up, Grenfell Tower burnt down, and Grenfell was really only about 200 yards away from the building. So we ended up turning our space into a sort of collection service for the deliveries and donations. And so we had at one point all the way around the sculpture all these piles and piles of donations of clothes and toiletries and food and water, and that was kind of amazing. So yeah, I mentioned before the Griffin Art Prize, so we ran it every year until 2018. And this is an example of the shortlisted artists. The winner in this year was Anna-Liba Lewis, who is actually the person standing with her back to the camera in that shot. At that point, she was kind of really protective of her image and where it was seen and what was, where it was being presented in the context for her own kind of image. And so in all of the publicity shots, she turned around and had her back to the camera. She's since stopped doing that, but it's kind of funny that those photos had to turn around now. So she is again. So I ended up actually doing a solo show of her a couple of years later, which I'll come on to in a bit. But yeah, that's all that kind of selection of the shortlisted artists from that particular year. Then at the May 2018, we closed Griffin Gallery because the company had decided to expand, basically take everything that we'd done for those 6 years at the Griffin Gallery and put all of that into a bigger, more bespoke space. So after about 6 months of kind of looking for spaces all over London, we discovered this old petrol station abandoned, which had been empty and disused for a few years, and the local developers at White City, where it is, were really keen to do something with it because it had become this kind of site for antisocial behaviour and things like that. And the local residents were getting a bit annoyed about it, and the trouble that they had with it was that it couldn't be completely redeveloped because an interesting fact for you, when a petrol station is decommissioned, it has to sit empty, untouched for 5 years because they empty the tanks underneath of fuel, and then they fill them up with water, and then they had to leave them for 5 years for any remaining fuel to seep out into the soil so that it's no longer dangerous, so that then you can dig into the ground and it won't cause any explosions and so on. And it had been empty for 2 years by the time we found it, so they gave us the lease for the next 3. And we got architects involved and designed this beautiful space. So it is a temporary structure. It can all be dismantled and taken away. It has no foundations. It's sitting on the top of the petrol station. So the big plinths that you can see in the picture, inside of there are the old petrol pumps, and the roof is the old canopy of the kind of forecourt of the petrol station. And the decision was to keep it all very kind of industrial feeling and in keeping with the sort of petrol station feel of the space. So that was quite an adventure to go on to kind of go through a build project with architects and builders and project managers and all sorts. And I was on the core kind of consulting team through that process. Lots of hard hat visits and visits with artists, especially artists who were going to be doing the first and second shows when it was all under construction and you couldn't really see what it was going to look like. That was all a big challenge. But in the end, after quite a few hiccups, all sorts of things going wrong, we were supposed to be opening in June 2018, so it would have been quite a nice smooth transition from Griffin Gallery closing to opening at Elephant West. In the end, we didn't open until November. So the first artist was messed around quite a lot, unfortunately, but that is how things happen. But we just shunted the whole program later, so we still opened with the same person, which was Maisie Cousins, a photographer who opened for us. That's the outside of the building. It's a little bit different now, but that's how it looked at the beginning. So this was the first show, which was a real challenge to put together because we literally didn't have a good view of what the space was going to look like until about 2 weeks before we opened. And Maisie went on a month-long residency 2 weeks before that. So we had to kind of get everything done in theory with lots of sketches and mock-ups and drawings. And we sort of thought it would work and just had to keep our fingers crossed that it would when we actually put it all up. And very sadly, Maisie actually never saw the final show because she was away at exactly the wrong time, and got back the day after we took it down. But so she wasn't there for the opening, unfortunately, and she wasn't there really for any of it, which was really sad because in the end, I think it looked really good. There was an animation on both those screens at the bottom, so that there was kind of movement. And we sort of went with this idea of, she created a whole new series of bodywork, which was all about food, and a kind of attraction and repulsion that you feel when you get really close into food that's been like pulled apart, or like remains of a meal, or they were quite seductive images, but they're also kind of disgusting because it looks kind of bodily as well. So we had kind of gone with this idea of layering up in images and having different textures involved. So hence the shiny floor and the reflections. And then in each of the large scale photographs, which are on each of the columns, there's also a light box on the top. So you've got a layer of one image with another image, and then more layering, and you can see the reflections of all of the images on that reflective floor as you move around the gallery space. So it was a way of basically making photography fill a very large cavernous space. I think we just about pulled off. This is another view with all the lights on, which didn't really look like that most of the time, but you get a better sense of how it's set up. And then in between these two, I also did a show with Annalisa Lewis that I mentioned just now. I haven't got any images of that in this presentation, but yeah, she did. She spent just over a year, creating a whole new body of large-scale paintings, which then we installed in Elephant, and that was February 2019. And she did it as a collaboration with her long-term friend, the musician, electronic musician Fortet. So we showed her work, and then he also created 3 new tracks to go with the work. She'd been kind of sending him images of her work. He'd been responding musically, and she'd respond again visually, and so on, over a period of about 8 or 9 months. So when you walked into the space, there were these paintings all around, and you were given a headset by the invigilator, and could listen to the music as you walked around. And there were sort of nice cushions on the floor so you could sit down. And twice a day we played the tracks out really loud to fill the whole space, because it was quite an immersive thing as well. And then we did an exclusive set in the space with Fortet, which was great. So it was really nice. We were starting to kind of bring together lots of different art forms. That was the whole kind of original concept of the Elephant West space, was it supposed to be bringing together artists, musicians, designers, fashion designers, dancers, you name it. Basically, it was meant to be a kind of real place of cultivation, I guess, and innovation. So that was that one. And then the final show that I curated there was this one here called Welcome Home, with the subtitle A Speculation on Living Spaces. So the idea for this one was that I invited a range of different artists to respond to the idea of a home of the future, and what kind of room would they create in a home of the future? What are the issues that they would be dealing with? So I had quite a few proposals come through. Either invited proposals from artists I knew already or had kind of done some research on, and I ended up with 4 different rooms, plus a video work from a different artist. So these 2 that you can see here, the one at the back is by David Rickard, in London, from New Zealand. And his was an idea of a bedroom. So he wanted to think about ideas of privacy, privacy in the home, privacy outside of the home, the idea of a bedroom being a place that is your kind of most sacred, secret space. Private things happen in there. But these days, privacy is a sort of non-physical thing, particularly, with our phones that we carry around the whole time. So he was thinking about privacy in different ways as well. And those curtains that you see hanging are his versions of Faraday cages. So they're made of really fine copper mesh, which if you're inside would completely cut you off from electromagnetic frequency, so the frequency coming from your mobile phones and smartwatches and whatever. And then the floor was all made of foam. So you had to take your shoes off and walk or sit or lie down. So it was a kind of communal space for anybody to kind of, like take a rest, basically. And then he had two projections on either side as well, which to do with waves. So thinking about brain waves and electromagnetic frequency waves. On the right, there was a recording of his brain frequency while he was watching the video. On the other side, which is a film of a lilo floating very gently out to sea off into the distance. So that was a lovely installation. And then the one closer is by a duo called Baum and Leahy, and they're very concerned with our kind of microbial landscape. So this was a sort of new sort of room, which was about kind of coming together and healing your inner world. So there was lots of steam coming out, and there were these vessels which carried all sorts of microbe generating gunk, basically soil and all sorts of things in there. And you're encouraged to interact, to smell and to touch and to lie down and sit. It was very beautiful. And they led a meditation during an event that we did. We had a healing day at the end of the Freeze Week, actually, which was nice. In the space where we invited lots of people to come and kind of run healing practices. So I ran some mini Reiki sessions for people. Family, he did a beautiful microbial meditation, and various things. Candida Powell Williams did a tarot reading, and so on. It's very nice. This was an installation by Bompus and Parr, which was a temple of halotherapy, which is salt therapy. So on the floor is raked rock salt. Down either side, you can see little stations where you've got different grinders with different types of salt from all over the world. And you're encouraged to read these little paddles that are sitting on the stools, to pick up a paddle, read what it said, and sort of mindfully move through the six stations, trying each piece of salt on a piece of chocolate. And they had this kind of whole meditative process, which they've written on the paddles, that's encouraging you to close your eyes and to feel the space. And there was a kind of altar at the end, which again had salt all in it. And it was very, very popular with children, this one. Highly interactive and rather wonderful. And that's a close-up of the Baum and Leahy. And there are a couple of other installations in there as well. But the whole idea about this was that it was meant to be very interactive. The whole thing was about rethinking what the home is all about. And then actually, really what came through really strongly was the idea of the home as a healing space. Pretty much all the artists dealing with that in some way, which I found really interesting, and I've kind of taken that forward in my thinking, my curatorial practice since then. We had lots of children, and it was just really lovely. So as you can see, this is the Bompus and Parr, and children really liked it. It was really fun. So that was for me, that was the end of Elephant. I left there at the end of this show, so that was October. And since then, the space is still there, but it has changed its profile somewhat, for various different reasons, partly to do with financial landscape and also to do with kind of strategic changes at the head office. So it's now kind of heading much more towards being a community space, which arguably is better for that area, to be honest. It is really needed. But that's, for me, it kind of reached a point where I realised the space was heading in a direction that I didn't really want to be going. So I parted ways happily in October and became a freelancer. So that's what I've been doing since then, although I had been doing some freelance curating a little bit before then too. So This image here is an exhibition I curated at Librium of Angus Hughes at Brinkton in 2017 called Stuff. That's that one. Had 7 different artists in that one from various different places. And the idea about that show was I was really thinking at the time about the sort of overwhelming amount of stuff we all have in our lives and kind of consumerism and where that was headed. So I did an exhibition that was very specifically about that, about the accumulation of stuff. And artists dealing with that in lots of different ways, either by using stuff to remake stuff or by trying to make their work very small, compact and foldable, or lots of different kind of thinking around that. I've also done a bit of writing, so friend of mine and Susie's, Nathaniel Recco, I have done a bit of writing for him, so I wrote an essay for his solo show that he had called The Shape of a City in Beirut in June. This is an example. So as a freelancer now, it's a very different scenario to being director or curator of a space, because A, I don't have space, B, that's a very kind of defined, focused thing, really. You've got a space to fill, you're building a program, pulling people and things into that space. Whereas now, I'm finding I have much more of a sort of portfolio practice, really. I'm doing lots of different things. So as I said, there's curating, which is ongoing, writing here and there when I'm asked to, consulting, and consulting is quite a sort of broad term. And so I'm doing consulting on lots of different levels now. One of which is working for a really amazing company called People Make It Work. And I'm one of a group of about 50 consultants that work as associates for People Make It Work. They're an organisation that specialises in change management, organisational development for the cultural sector in the UK. So we work with a huge range of cultural organisations, from really ones like the Tate, National Theatre, and so on, all the way down to kind of really small artist-led, artist-run organisations, community arts organisations, helping them with change and organisational development. And obviously right now, that's a pretty critical thing. So lots of us, the consultants, have been offering our time and expertise for free to those who need it. And it's been really kind of wonderful to be part of that community that has mobilised itself to support the cultural sector when everything kind of fell off a cliff a couple of months ago. Helping them to reimagine, A, to stabilise themselves, and B, to then just start to kind of reimagine what their organisation might look like as we start to emerge from the coronavirus crisis. I'm also consulting as a curator in this instance for an art advisory company based in New York called Open Art Advisory. They have asked me to propose exhibitions, bring artists, develop curatorial concepts for physical exhibitions as and when they're able to happen, but also I'm kind of working on an online one at the moment, which I can share with you all when it's ready. I'm also doing a very strange thing. I am working again as a sort of curator consultant with a team of people that have built a robot. As you can see, there she is on the left, kind of creepy looking, human looking robot who has the ability to draw from life. So she has a robotic arm that is kind of connected to the software behind 2 cameras that she has in her eye, so she can sit in front of someone and draw them. That's one of her, that's a self-portrait actually on the right. So as you can see, she's not brilliant yet, but she is only a year old, and there's an amazing team of developers working behind her, kind of constantly tweaking and changing all of the software and the algorithms and the neural networks that she works from. The AI, she's AI enabled basically. She also does performances and she does all sorts of stuff. And I'm sort of working with them on a number of different things, just kind of giving them some advice, helping them develop the right sort of messaging. And I'm entering the robot into some art prizes as well, which is a very weird thing, but quite interesting. It throws up so many issues, which you're welcome to ask me about at the end of this. slideshow. Another thing I'm doing is basically introducing artists to a platform called Art Gazette, which was established in South Africa about a year ago and is now expanding globally, to the UK, to London sort of next, and then to New York and Hong Kong and so on. And they basically specialise in acquiring works on paper from artists, and then selling them to private clients. So they mostly their private clients are boutique hotels, private members clubs, shared office spaces, things like that. So during this time of coronavirus, it's been really interesting because they buy in bulk from when they decide they like an artist, they will buy several pieces at once, and then they pay up front. So they don't wait for the work to be sold before you get the money, they pay you straight up front, which is just a really unusual, interesting model. And it's they're in a big acquisition mode at the moment, so it's been really great. I've been able to kind of call up all these artists that I think might have work that's suitable and introduce them to the platform. And quite a few of them have had work purchased, which is nice. It's quite a nicely curated selection of stuff. You look at it. So that's a sort of sweep of my, art professional practice. And then the extra bit, which I do mention because some people were interested in it, is I'm a Reiki healer as well. So I don't know, Willie, if you would have heard of Reiki. If you haven't, it is a form of energy healing, but it's also an individual kind of spiritual practice. So there's a 3-stage process for learning Reiki. Level 1 is for self-healing. You learn about the basic principles of the Reiki, you learn how to self-heal. You begin to learn how to work with others. Level 2 is for professional practice. So you then go a step further, you learn about healing others, you learn about the wider set of principles. And then level 3 is master level. I'm at level 2 at the moment. I'm planning to do master level later this year. Once you've done master, you can then teach. And you, but it's also kind of a much deeper way of kind of going into the practice, basically. So I do that. When there's no coronavirus happening, I do it as a one-on-one, hands-on session. People will come to me. I have a room that I do it in. I place hands on the body. It's kind of an hour-long session. But obviously with this whole situation, I've been doing it remotely, which is a strange thing to get your head around, but it does work. It's slightly different, but it works as well, I'm finding. And I also kind of use the principles of Reiki for my own meditation and self-healing practice. So I thought, just to kind of close me chatting, I would just kind of talk to you a bit about, what's been going on the last couple of months and how I've been feeling about it, things that have been running through my addled brain. So for me, when it all happened, it felt like chaos, and it felt like just so many questions. And I don't know whether you will recognise these kind of questions and this kind of flow of thinking, but this is how it was for me anyway. My first thought was, is everyone okay? Is everyone that I know okay? Is everyone beyond that okay? Is everyone in the world okay? What the hell's going on? And then am I okay? And I realised that I kind of wasn't, and I got coronavirus really early on. I got it about 9 weeks ago now, and that was kind of before it was really being talked about in this country, before lockdown happened, or any of that stuff. So I didn't really think that I had it. I thought I just had a bit of a cold, which now thinking back, it's just kind of awful. But I just imagine there's loads and loads of people that were in that situation and at that time too. Just kind of went unreported. So yeah, I got coronavirus. It was fine. I was sick for about a week, probably, and then I recovered. And then it was like, so once it got better, okay, I'm over it. That's fine, good. Now, obviously, all of my work kind of fell off a cliff. This lockdown happened. So how do I make sure I'm going to be okay? And how long is this going to go on for? And all of those kind of frightening questions. And what will I do if I have no work? What will I do? How am I going to manage financially? Is my family going to be okay? And then, what do I do with these acres of time? And then the next thought for me was like, how can I use these things that I've been learning, these tools that I have to help others? And as I'm sort of getting involved in the holistic healing world through learning about Reiki and so on. And actually the whole kind of holistic healing world have started to mobilize itself around the time that I was starting to think, oh, what can I do? Which was quite interesting. And once I kind of found a little outlet for that, I started to think, oh, maybe I could start painting again as well. I mean, I haven't really, I started my life as an artist. I didn't mention that, but I did. Did fine art at university and was a practicing artist for about 7 years after that. And then through a series of kind of decision-making points, I decided to become a curator. So since then, I haven't really touched anything in terms of making. So maybe this is an opportunity to start making. But before I started this talk, Susie and I were having a chat about that, and I was saying to her how nice it was just to have some time to just get out some paint and to just play and to have like no outcome intended, and how wonderful that was. And I'd totally forgotten how wonderful that was. I feel like I hadn't done it since I was a child, because once I got to kind of foundation level, A level even, then it was all very intentional and serious and leading somewhere and had to be good, and and the stuff I've been doing on my kitchen table doesn't have to be anything. It's great. Then I guess it became more sort of philosophical for me. Like, started to settle into the rhythm of being in lockdown and thinking like, what is the stuff that actually matters? Family matters, friends matter, and the planet matters. My mental health matters. And realizing that like I was starting to kind of shed things from my life that didn't matter so much. And I think for me that was like a really helpful kind of perspective on the life that I'd been living, a little bit just because that's what we all were doing, running about like crazy people. And then I started to think about art, coming back to the art conversation. What role does it play in this context? Does it play a role at all? I mean, I imagine probably with you have gone through this thought process. Of course it does. That came out with a yes, it does. But I think I'm going to talk in a minute about some really good things I think which have come out of this. And I'm realizing that it's like the kind of small stuff is what matters at the moment, rather than the really big, sweeping, grand things. It's smaller things. And then I started to wonder how I could help the artists I'm working with, realizing that all the artists that I'm working with are going to be in a difficult financial position because suddenly their income is dried up. And that's when things like Art Gazette started to come into their own. Lots of these kind of individual projects start popping up that I can put people into, which is good and feels like the community is like bound itself together and is doing everything it can to help each other. And it's only really at that point, and this is like maybe about 5 or 6 weeks in, and I start thinking, right, what are other people doing? I felt like I was going very in for the first 4 or 5 weeks and not really wanting to engage with what was going on. In fact, stopped reading the news, stopped looking at Facebook, just shut myself right down until I felt settled and safe, I think, and then started going back out again and looking at what was going on in the world. And working out what was going on out there, and if what's interesting or useful or relevant, what is just noise. But I do feel like everybody was scrambling to get themselves online, and quite a lot of stuff out there was just noise. And I'm interested to see where the phoenixes are rising from the fire. Like, I feel like inevitably some things will die. Some things will have their time. And then maybe that's a good thing. Maybe there's some things that have been hanging on that need to be let go to allow for a new landscape. And then I start thinking about what lessons we can learn from what's happened over the last few months. All of those things I've been thinking about before. What are the good things? What are the good things that will come out of this? What are the lessons that we can learn? How do we build something better? We're not going to go back to exactly how things were before this, and nor should we, I don't think. Again, that's a provocation for you all. And so how do we build a better tomorrow from what is left? What are the things we really want to pull forward? It's like, oh no, that stuff from back then was really good. We definitely want to keep that. and what do we just let go, and what new things we could put in place. And then on top of that, what do I want my role to be in the building of that? And I think for me personally, I felt like I've learned so much. I've learned so much about what really matters to me. And I've realized that having a kind of slightly false status of being like head of an organization is not good for my soul. And that what is good for my soul is working with artists on a very individual one-on-one basis. That's what really drives me. And having time and space for my own individual practices as well. Like I've been doing a lot of gardening, and I realized that I really love that. And I want to do more of the Reiki. I want to spend more time in my life doing yoga that really feeds me. Things like that. So creating more of a balance where I'm really pulling the things into my life that really nourish me, rather than worrying about some kind of imagined status in the world. So that's an interesting learning for me, for sure. And then, my final question, I think, on that was like, who do I want to work with? What do I want to leave behind? What's the stuff that actually I've just been doing because I felt like it was important? But maybe, is it really? So there you go. That's my brain dump from the last 8 weeks. And I'm quickly going to just run through some things that I just think have been interesting. So some lovely things that I've seen. You will all know the Getty Challenge, and I think that came out so quickly, and it was so wonderful and such a lovely kind of fast response to keeping themselves in the public mind, but also in really engaging and inviting everyone to get involved. And I thought that was really a delightful way of staying relevant and being open. Also, I'm sure you'll know about the Isolation Art School as well, and I think what's been lovely about that is it's, again, extremely inclusive. And that thing that I was just saying about being small, kind of small things in the home close to us, like that is just allowing for that to happen. And I think that's been really wonderful, kind of community building, mutually supportive, lovely thing that's happened. Again, that's to support pledge for all the same reasons. And I just picked this particular one. Emma, my cousin's been doing some podcasts with other artists, and I think, like, for me, all of these are really kind of demonstrating how the art community at a grassroots level is bound together, and that is really inspiring, I think, and I think gives great hope for the future as well. That a crisis happens, and very quickly we all mobilise ourselves and support each other and make sure everyone's okay, and make sure we keep doing what we're doing, because it's important. It's wonderful. Also, just a couple of other funny things. So, restaurants in Holland has come up with an ingenious way to continue serving people. So they've got these little glass houses, and they bring the food in on these really long platters. And I just thought that was amazing. I mean, I don't know how they're going to make enough money, but anyway, I just thought that was wonderful. And then I'm interested to see what other innovations pop up like that. Like, okay, what do we do? Make food. How do we serve it to people in an isolated way? Brilliant. I was kind of interested to see how things like the Frieze viewing room, when Frieze New York opened up, that within the viewing room, there's becoming a bit more transparency. Like, if you look on the right where I've circled that, you can pick artists by price. And like, that's mental. Like, that never happens. Like, normally you walk into an art fair and you have to sidle up to someone and secretly go, how much is that worth? You really want to know. So I feel like there's a little chink in the armor of the top level of the art world of kind of maybe becoming a bit more transparent, which I thought was a little bit of hope for us all. And an enormous amount of democratizing as well, the way the National Theatre has been putting out full-length, free stuff every Thursday. Amazing. It is also controversial for putting out so much free content, and that's something we've been talking about a bit at People Make It Work, and again, I'd be interested in your thoughts on that. And this is something that I found quite amazing. David Sperner, obviously one of the top blue chip galleries, reached out to sponsors and used his platform to support a whole raft of smaller galleries. You can see here, platform. This is within his digital online viewing room. He has these sections for supporting smaller galleries in London, New York, and so on. So you can see the list of galleries there that have all got a platform on his website, which I think is kind of a pretty generous thing to do, using his existing audience and collector base and so on to try and support the smaller galleries. I think is pretty wonderful. This is not my child. It was just pulled off the internet, but I just think there is something really wonderful about reconnecting with nature, and I think I'm seeing it everywhere in the parks, on people's balconies, just listening to the birds. You know, the planes and the cars will stop so we can hear the birds now, and so for me that is hugely hopeful, and we all really need to have a better connection to Mother Earth, I feel. And so that leaves me with hope for the future. And I leave you all with the question, what kind of world do you want to build when we come out of lockdown? Thank you. So that was me. Question time. Susie disappeared.
Well, I'm just muting.
Good. Okay, good. Good. I'm glad you're there.
You've highlighted my two favourite things to do at Openings, is that eat all your chocolate and ask people the prices of artwork are freeze. It's so fun to go up to people and just pretend you're interested in buying the work. Thank you so much, that was amazing. Does anyone have any questions? Some people.
Yeah, you mentioned that you were an artist and then you kind of ended up writing. I was sort of curious to hear a little bit more about that, because I sort of struggled this sort of balance a little bit between making my art and curating shows myself and that kind of thing. But what was the kind of deciding thing that made you say, I'm not going to make artwork for a bit and I'm going to work with other artists?
That's a good question. It was a wrestle, so it wasn't an easy decision. But I think basically I got to the point where so when I graduated, I went straight into working full time for a gallery in Newcastle where I was living at the time. I worked full time ever since then, and so I was always trying to fit it in around like full time jobs and so on. And I did that until I left the Northeast, and then I moved to London, and then I couldn't afford a studio. So that was like one kind of element, was like, oh, I don't have space to make work anymore. But I was still kind of trying to make work on my kitchen table, that sort of trying to fit it in. And I just kind of over a period of time, I think I came to the realization that I was much happier working with artists to make things happen than I was when I was on my own in a studio or kind of struggling to make something. It kind of always felt like a struggle for me. I didn't really have that many delightful moments. And so I think I kind of had to let go of this idea of what I thought I should be, as opposed to actually what was like really feeding me. But it took a while for me to like own up to that, I think, and then let go. But because there's there was all that, like, my granny always thought I was amazing at drawing and painting, and it'd be such a shame if I stopped. And, there's sort of external pressures that I kind of had internalized. But once I let it go, to be honest, for me, it was this huge relief to let it go. And I haven't missed it. So it shows really, and this is why, for me, working with artists, for whom it is not really a choice, it's like, you have to make, regardless of whatever is going on in the world, you have to make. That's what being an artist is. And I was not really up for that, to be honest. I just kind of thought I was. And then I had like a moment of like, oh yeah, no, I'm not. That's not me. So that's a long-winded way of saying it. It took a while, but yeah, I think there's that answer.
Yeah, it makes sense.
I had a couple of questions. Can you hear all right?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Yeah, I really enjoyed that. A couple of questions. One was, you were saying that since leaving, was it Elephant West and doing consultancy and so on, and kind of thinking about the future, what are the conversations that are taking place with the kind of art world or the kind of gallery world, and how, a lot of stuff has moved online and people are doing stuff, virtual tours and virtual exhibitions, but beyond that, a little bit, are there flavours of how people are starting to think that the landscape is going to be? So that was one question. One other quick question was that I was also intrigued when you said how the lockdown has been an opportunity to let go of things. I was curious as to maybe an example or two of what you let go, because I've got a couple of things that I kind of, I've also thought during this period, yeah, maybe I can let go of those, but I still can't find myself letting them go. And so I'm curious to see what sorts of things you've done and how you actually said goodbye to them.
Letting go is hard, but it's
I know.
requires a lot of don't know, self-management, I guess. So to answer your first question, I think honestly it's a bit too early to kind of give you any grand future predictions. Yeah, so there's a lot of conversation about remodeling of organisational structures, basically. So it's only been 8 weeks, so I mean that's really not very long for people to completely rethink how they do what they do. But I think what is going to be interesting is that the smaller, more agile, or more startup kind of organisations, cultural or otherwise, actually, are the ones that are going to really flourish in this situation because they can adapt and change really quickly. The big, heavy, weighty, hierarchical organisations are going to find it a lot harder, particularly those ones that have buildings, big buildings that are now a burden, basically. They will be for who knows how long. So, what happens to those buildings? How do they get used more purposefully during this time? It's a really big question. And I guess so what I'm doing with my fellow People Make It Work associates is helping organisations to create a framework for thinking through those issues. So we're not trying to solve it for them, I couldn't do that, but we're kind of trying to help them hold their hands and to take them through the steps that they should be taking. So talking to their board, talking to their staff, working out who their audiences are, who are their communities, how are they built, how have they been communicating with them, how should they change? Who is the community now? I mean, sort of talking to organisations about shifting their thinking from audience to community, because I think that is much more relevant now. It's like people that you were reaching only online, they're as relevant to you now as the people who were walking through the doors and spending money or whatever. So there's no simple answer to that. I think it's just everything is up in the air, right? It's like everything's being thrown up, and then it's like which bits do you catch? And yeah, so I'm like working with the team of people to try and help people navigate through that. Give me another couple of months, I might have a better answer for you on that one. And then your question about letting go. I think it's really just because I've had so much time kind of just being at home, right? Not like running around London and like going to meetings in Hackney, going to meetings in Kensington, like spending so much time like running all over the place, running to catch up with myself, basically. And I feel like any of us who are living in a city probably have that kind of feeling a lot of the time. And this has provided an opportunity to just stop all of that and go, right, once you get over the panic and the anxiety of that situation, obviously, have a little moment to like, right, what's the stuff that I miss? What do I miss? Do I really miss the kind of feeling of status of working with a big, heavy institution? Like, I think that's been the biggest question for me. It is like, so I've had this like role of being head curator or director or whatever, not of big organisations, but of like something with some kind of status. And for me, I think I've realised that I really, that is something to let go. And it's totally like an ego thing. Because like, if you come with a space, you're like, I'm the director of that. But people are like, oh yeah, you're that. If I'm like, I'm a freelance curator, people are like, well, who are you? Why should I talk to you? And so you have to like let that, I had to like learn that trying to meet that kind of need of status is not a good thing for me personally. So I feel much happier when I'm kind of sitting in my own world and it's authentic and it's based on relationships and really good intentional things are happening. rather than just kind of like meeting some kind of status thing, you know? You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you.
Going on from that, actually, just thinking about when you're working at Griffin Gallery, and obviously, and you being a painter for you, and a lot of your shows, there's this kind of interest in materiality, I noticed. And how much of that was to do with the clients, you know, these, was it Winsor & Newton, or the kind of paint manufacturer, Liquitex? How much of that was, or how much freedom rather did you have in the shows that you were putting on at that time, and how much was that, you know, were you able to just kind of like, were your two interests aligned with their interests essentially?
That's a good question. It's a slightly complex answer, I think, so bear with. I think at the beginning I had an enormous amount of freedom because they really had no idea what they wanted to do. They were like, we made this space, we want it to, they basically have like a one-line objective, make it into a vibrant, buzzy, arty place. Full stop. And here's a bit of money to do it, off you go. So that meant that I had to create a strategy. So, and I kind of knew that in order to make it sustainable, I had to build a strategy that made sense to company. So they didn't ask me to do anything really in particular, but I kind of, having sort of, I inherited a really mostly crappy program for the first year, so I kind of just had to kind of make that happen. But during that year, learned a lot about what mattered to the company, what mattered to the people who were coming, what mattered to artists. So I kind of took all of that learning to kind of then build a strategy, and the strategy was to focus on materiality. So it wasn't really like some kind of deep-seated interest of mine at the outset, or at least it wasn't built on that premise. It was just like, this makes sense. Because it meant that I could build a program that was quite broad in scope, but still relevant. So what I didn't want to do, obviously for obvious reasons, was make it Winsor & Newton gallery and like have, you know, paintings made from Winsor & Newton paint on the wall. That was what they wanted, although they thought they wanted that, and I was like, no. That's not a good idea for so many reasons. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to focus on materiality more broadly. So it means we can include sculpture, we can include printmaking, we can include, you know, whatever. And that way we were reflecting on what's going on in the contemporary art scene more broadly. And we'll connect with loads more people, introduce them to companies, to the brands, and, you know, like I had to teach them that basically every artist at least draws a bit. You know, like even a performance artist will probably still scribble a bit on a bit of paper. So they're going to be using materials at some point. So it was always about that kind of negotiation between wanting to do things well and relevantly, authentically, and meeting the needs of the funders, the owners of the space. I think with Griffin Gallery, we kind of managed to dance that line quite nicely, and then I managed to push it. I kind of gained their trust, you know, over the years. It was up and down, definitely, but it sort of went in that sort of trajectory. And then, you know, by the time we did David Mack, they were like, yeah, cool. So there was no question other than the insurance. So as long as we're insured, it's fine, we want. So yeah, I mean, I think that it definitely came over the time, like building trust with people, showing what was possible bit by bit. So I didn't leap straight in with the David Mack installation, you know, that was like 5 years down the line. Yeah.
And have you found that, like, now you're working freelance, you're kind of starting from scratch each time, and then in terms of those relationships with the people that own places that you're showing your exhibitions, or, you know, is that a new challenge?
Yeah, definitely. Finding spaces in London is really hard. It's really hard because you've got your options for spaces are find a space, have complete ownership of it and pay through the nose. B, work with somebody, but then have to do what they want you to do. C, kind of get your way in to a very tightly knit existing kind of clique of people or whatever. So those are your three options, really. So it's tough, definitely. Which is why the vast majority of what I'm doing is actually not putting things in physical space now. It's working with people online, it's thinking consulting, it's, you know, it's like talking and moving, and it's not, I'm not really doing that much of like bringing physical objects into a space right now. I'm hoping that I will do, because it's really, and this is the problem with the art world, is it's all about knowing the right people. You know, if you, I feel like these things kind of come when you meet someone, and then they talk to someone, and then they talk to someone, and then it comes back round, and then they're like, oh, Becca, you curate this thing. And then you have to wait for that to happen in a way. Like if you're too pushy with it, people don't like it either. It's a negotiation. I do really feel like now, as a freelance curator, I'm in the same position as all artists everywhere. We're like over here, knocking on the door, going, yeah, it's interesting. Feels better in a way. I've always felt more like an artist than anybody else. So.
I wondered if one last question. Don't know if it's working. It's working.
Yeah.
Oh, great. So I'm really interested by the fact that you were talking about like your Reiki practice as well. And I recently, well, over the last couple of years, I guess, been bringing a much more like holistic approach to my art, and like encompassing meditation, breath work, found materials rather than making paintings, because I now have a bit of a problem with producing stuff, like so much stuff, especially as a painter, you know. So it's much more tied to like concern with the environment, I suppose, that I've always really felt. Bearing that in mind, though, I think understandably there's such a influx of this kind of artwork at the moment, like more concerns in sort of like, dare I say, like magical, or like what, you know, like ecological practices, or like whole like health practices. And I mean, Boston Lee's works amazing with that, right? It's like it crosses boundaries, I think, like fantastically. But I'm just wondering, like, yeah, what your opinion on that is, like all of this work coming into the space that maybe I don't know.
I love it. I love it.
Okay, great.
It's great, and I think why shouldn't we be holistic in the way we look at things?
Yeah.
Why should we be siloed? Why should art be one thing and healing be another? It's all connected. Everything's connected, as you know. If you do anything to do with energy, or you know, everything comes from the same place. So I don't think it's helpful to think of things in separate boxes. I think it's much more helpful to think of things as all intertwining and supporting and influencing each other. One thing can totally influence another. And I think for me, the moment that I've had in my career so far that felt like a real bringing together of all these things in a beautiful way was the healing day that we did at Elephant West at the close of the Welcome Home exhibition on the final day of Freeze Week, which is, you know, everyone's exhausted on that day anyway. And it was so lovely to kind of be in an art environment with all these installations created by artists, bringing in healers, yoga practitioners, having meditations in the space, and kind of everyone kind of coming in, being in a space, and kind of pulling on everything that was in that space to heal them, or to help them feel comfortable, or to learn something, or and it built this little community for the day, which was lovely. And I would really love to see more of that. You know, I'd really love to see more of that happening in our big institutions that can feel quite old sometimes. You know, I think there's a lot to be said for feeling warm and comfortable. I think that when you're feeling warm and comfortable, you're much more open to experiences, you know?
Yeah, definitely. And if you're always living in this like anxiety, fear, then you tend to just create a work about anxiety and fear, and I think that's so dangerous, you know?
Totally, it's self-perpetuating, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. I'm into it. Keep doing it.
Okay, guys, I think unless there are any last questions. We do this at the end of every talk. I'm used to everyone, and it's going to do gallery review, and if we can just give a quick clap.
Thank you.
For recording as well.